What a weird intro to Real Talk Christian Podcast, where we drink coffee and have some creepy music for Halloween.
Happy Halloween, folks! Sorry, happy Resurrection. Resurrection Day, that's Easter. Happy Reformation Day.
Reformation Day, thank you. But on today's episode, we're going to be talking about dead people walking. It's our Halloween episode, bro, so you know we got to bring something
absolutely
off the rails. Yeah, so you guys ready?
I'm ready to talk about zombies.
Let's go. All right, I think the people have probably
Have you guys had enough of that yet?
The weirdness.
Have you guys had enough?
I was like, Mark, look, man, I got the Halloween intro this year. Because usually we sit here and we figure it out together.
Yeah, we normally figure it out together.
Well, I was going through the Stream Deck sounds, and I'm like, this was kind of an off-the-wall, like...
And I'm nervous that I hit record like a half second too late. So hopefully they caught the whole intro, because that was weird. And then the horse neigh.
Well, because usually I'm the one that does the ha-ha. It's like a creepy Western is what it sounded like. Like the carnival, like
that song kind of sounded like it was on caffeine. Like that song sounded like Halloween on caffeine. That's what that song was.
Just a little bit, man.
But either way, dude, this is our 5th year in a row having a special episode for Halloween.
It is the 5th Halloween episode.
We've done some as bonus episodes. We've done some as normal episodes. And, we had a really fun conversation in the group because we were talking about just ideas for Halloween episodes. Right. And I do have to say, dude, we got like 5 or 6 really good ones.
Well, some of them were like,
really
we've covered, and they're like, hey, you should touch on these topics again. And I was like, yeah, we could.
I will say though, but there's been a lot of weird talk and stuff about aliens lately.
Yeah, which I'll
like in the news.
I mean,
so I'm like, people want to talk about that. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm ready for that one yet. We talk about aliens and extraterrestrials.
I mean,
and stuff.
my opinion has not changed since the previous episode. So it was like, I mean, we could talk about it, but I'm just going to say what I said back then.
I'm getting old. And whenever I see weird crap like that, and again, this is not conservative Marc coming out. This is more just looking, going, whenever it's like political season, there's some weird crap that happens.
Always.
And
every
I'm
time.
like,
it's on a cycle.
But seriously, and so I'm like, I'm looking at this going,
is it true?
Is it true?
Have you seen the picture of the alien they released?
Yeah, the little tiny one where it's like,
and then they're like, look, they were kidding. It's a hoax. It's cake. And like they had like somebody was cutting a piece of cake out of it.
Now that's funny.
It was great.
I remember seeing a picture of a side-by-side of what he looked like and then what like some like cartoon character looked like or something like that, or a Klingon maybe. No, that was with Jesus.
No, that was Saint Nicholas.
Saint Nicholas, that's right. Saint Nicholas with the Klingon
they're
head.
Like he's a Klingon.
Oh, who put that in the Facebook group?
I don't know, but it was hilarious.
I don't know, man.
So if you haven't already checked out the Facebook group, tonight's episode is brought to you by Mr. None Other Than Brian Poland, a dear friend of mine. But he's also in the Facebook group. He's like, dude, you know what you guys should talk about?
Talk about them zombies.
Walking Dead people. And I'm like...
Absolutely.
But he named a specific section of Walking Dead people, and we were like, all right, we got you, but we're not going to spoil it yet. Just think, Real Talk Christian Podcast, Walking Dead people. Maybe you can put it together.
We'll see what happens.
But yeah, Marc, how's it been going, my good sir?
Like in the Facebook group and me getting like razzed, or just in general?
So, data recording. Yesterday we had an episode drop of What is a Godly Woman?
What is a godly wand?
Or in Marc's perspective, what is a godly wand? Like Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Dude, and then my sister-in-law Jamie's out there throwing the SpongeBob GIFs in there. Like, come on, Jamie.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Look after your brother-in-law, man.
I was like, man, I'm going to razz you about it. And then you got razzed so hardcore.
No. You texted me, and then the Facebook group, I'm like, bro, there's already a thread.
Yeah,
there's already a thread. It's like Reddit up in here.
It was pretty good. And I'm like, you know what? They've razzed you hard enough. I'm not going to razz you as bad, but I am still going to mention it.
You jumped in that group, man. You had a little bit of fuel to that fire.
What, me? Little old me?
And then I gotta say, Pastor Brando coming in there with his Matt Walsh jokes, cracking me up. And
what is a woman? A wand?
What is a wand? And I'm like, I don't know, but what's a woman?
Yeah, right.
But the Facebook group has been a lot of fun for many reasons. One, just the pure enjoyment and fun. And there's been a few of you guys who have commented and said that there's been a lot of other Facebook groups you've been part of that have been very, what's the word I'm looking for?
Plain Jane.
No, not plain Jane. More like antagonistic towards different worldviews. Like, did I tell you about the Reformation group that called Soche a heretic? I dug my heels in and went ham on some of them fools this last week.
Oh yeah.
Don't have an art like if people want to fight about today's Christian worship music and how unbiblical it is, bro, I will take you to the cleaners in that conversation. So I did. I don't let people just make stuff up where it's like, what do you think of today's stuff? And everyone's like, oh, it's so bad because of this and this and this. And
I still hold true. It has to have good theology.
Oh, no, I said that too. But what I'm saying, but my thing was the fact, I'm like, you're asking the wrong question. I said, the question should be is, what should we do about songs that are traditional hymns and modern that are not theologically correct? That's the right question. Yeah. There's some great modern worship. And I brought up the passage about, we're supposed to sing a new song and someone's like, well, reading that context, it sounds like it was just something about that one specific new song.
It just cracks me up because so many hymns, right? That's the big thing.
So many hymns suck. They're like funeral songs.
I really like hymns.
No, me too.
So many hymns were written to bar tunes from back in that time period. And it's like, as soon as you throw that out there, they're like, well, I don't listen to those hymns.
Oh, and then classical music was considered ungodly and sinful, and then musical instrument, like the piano was banned in worship services, and now it's like the flagship for conservative. Like, I don't know.
Here's the thing. It's got to be theologically sound. You have to do it not to draw attention to yourself, and you should make a joyful noise to the Lord.
Yep.
And it should be a song that the corporate body can worship together.
And I will also say it should be done distraction-free and with excellence. And what about the Leviticus? Played well.
Well,
in Leviticus, it said they were gifted
as the musicians.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm all for a special song with somebody who may not be as skilled. That's fine. I'm okay with that if they're doing it unto the Lord. But yes, I think it's hard for a corporate body to worship with that. So,
absolutely. But so people in our Facebook group are saying that's really cool to be at a place where it's not overly antagonistic. So thank you guys for not making the Facebook group suck. But the other thing that's really cool is there's been people who have said, hey, I am really struggling with X, Y, and Z. And people are like, hey, I don't have any advice if I'm praying for you. Then people are like, I got you, boo-boo. Here's some advice.
Right.
And so we have that stuff going on. We got meme sharing going on. People are sharing sermons from their pastors that they're like, hey, here's a sermon I was listening to. Here's a clip I was listening to. So there's just a lot of fun things in that Facebook group that's been going on.
Yep.
Including seeing some of you guys wearing the RTC merch in the Facebook group.
So if you didn't know already, if you checked our show notes over the past, 3, 4, 5 episodes, whatever I've been putting it in, there's a link to actually go to our merch store, which thank this brother over here wearing the RTC shirt. It is finally up and going because your boy over here dropped the ball.
No. You set it up and then I ran with the ball.
I was like, here's some.
I thought about the Facebook group too. You set it up and I ran with it.
I was having issues with the graphics for some reason. Then you came in and like, bro,
no, I had to follow specs.
You're like, don't worry, boo boo, I got you.
So if you go into our store, it looks like there's only like 4 products, but it's really 4 or 5 different designs, and you click on the design and then you see all the products.
Right. It's called a store. It's like a product store. And so there's 5 different product stores.
What section do you want to go into? Do you want to go into the black RTCD logo?
Yeah, so
the
it's
white one?
Exactly.
The purple one?
Right.
The green one?
So I'm wearing a shirt from a different podcast called
what?
Dork Day Afternoon. And it's my buddy's podcast. But
the one across the street?
Yeah, so they use the same system we're using, the Redbubble. That's how I found out about it. And so this would be their common wood pigeon line. So that's what it is. Basically, it's like a line, right? So you got the RTC line, like the classic logo, and then the other stuff that we got in there, and the Kingdom Over
everything
line and all that stuff. So
that's some good stuff. But so make sure you check out the merch store. Get over there. Get in the Facebook group. There's 1.2. Well, that's 1,200 people in the Facebook group right now.
We understand, boo.
It's been a while to see this podcast grow, and you guys are reaching out to us with DMs, you're reaching out to us with emails, and it's just absolutely awesome, man. So here's the deal. We got to get into this conversation.
We do. It's a long conversation, and your boy over here.
You're hurting. You got surgery coming up next week.
So I got surgery next week. I got 2 hernias. I got to go get some surgery on.
I like how you just go over that.
So I gotta. I'm hurting a little bit.
I'm trying to keep it moving for us, boss.
What coffee are you drinking tonight, bro?
I'm drinking decaf again because I don't want to wake up another panic attack.
He's like, I don't want to wake up.
Dude, I've had so many different decafs. I've had so many different decafs, and I keep going back to the Electric Brews and Elkhart. I cannot beat their decaf. Cool. So I'm drinking that. I got it in my Yeti. In case for y'all Yeti haters. And then I got my other Yeti upstairs for next episode for next week. So we ready. But what are you drinking?
I am drinking. So this was actually, and I forget who sent it.
Is that a listener coffee?
This is a listener.
Oh, the Phoenix stuff.
This is the Phoenix Mexican right here.
Oh,
and I did it in a French press, and I did the
Can I
one.
smell it?
And I did the 1-to-12 ratio. I did the 1-to-12 ratio.
Okay.
So it's 30 grams.
That's pretty strong.
30 grams, grinds.
Yep.
And then 360 of water, grams
Did
of
you
water.
measure it?
Heck yeah,
You
I did.
measured it?
At 203 degrees for 6 minutes.
That's how you do it.
It's the perfect, man. It's smooth.
Now,
It's smooth like berry wine.
So the Mexican is still my favorite. Like I've still been buying
Hands
Mexican
down.
everywhere I go, and
Hands
I got Beth to admit like Mexican is her favorite roast because
I
we
need
tried
to-
other ones. She goes, I keep liking this one. I'm
I
like,
need to-
that's Mexican.
I need to get some more Mexican beans
Mexican high ground?
and roast some more.
I will
man.
say the more I get into light roast coffee, the more I stray away and honestly can't even really drink dark roast.
Yeah,
So the Sumatran one that came with us from the Phoenix was
That was
also
my-
good. I finished it.
It was a dark roast,
but that
though.
was hard for me to drink because it was so dark and full.
You can't brew it either less grinds or less time, depending on.
Yeah, so
what
I've been
you're
going for light roast lately. It was
Yeah.
good. It was a good dark roast, but I'm like, man, this is just so thick. Like it was a meaty good coffee. But
Meat.
But I drink light roast now because I'm a pansy.
No, because
I'm a grass fairy.
you like the bougie coffee,
I do
like
love
you
bougie.
like your brother right here.
That's true. But
Listen,
I
Nathan.
can't remember who sent us that.
I don't remember. I have to go back and look. But Nathan Hornick told me, he goes, I love coming to your house for small group. I'm like, yeah, why is that? He goes, because you got the good coffee.
But yes.
I'm like, you know it, bro. And so you're welcome anytime to come drink coffee.
I love it, man. So we drink some good coffee. So hopefully
Yeah.
it's morning or it's afternoon, whenever you're listening to this, you're drinking some good coffee too, and not some Folgers or Maxwell's House, because the best part of waking up is not having Folgers in your cup.
But if you are drinking that, we will pray for you.
And Jesus still loves you. So we have a review to read, though, and this one is not a 5-star.
It is not, but
It's not a 4-star.
It's kind of a different.
It's a 3-star.
But
and I'm here for it.
But it's like the title throws me off because it doesn't match the 3-star rating. But whatever.
But I get why. So this was left for us back on June 6th from Doug. It's like when you hit the rumble strip, when it says, I feel like there's a bit too much pride at times towards personal perspective. That's fair.
all right.
But overall, an excellent podcast to dive into tough topics and prepare you for those tough conversations in real life. Keep up the good work. I've heard them all and multiple times. Well, Doug, A, thank you for the review. And B, send us an email at realtalkchristopodcast@gmail.com. And Janelle, because Janelle is amazing. We'll get you that, dude. She is Johnny on the spot with these mini swag bags.
She's really good at it.
So,
man.
but seriously, hit us up with the email and we will get a mini swag bag to you. And I did have a message today saying, hey, I listen on Spotify. I left a rating. I can't leave a review. Can I just leave a review on Facebook for you guys and that count? And I said, absolutely not. Just kidding. Yes, it does.
You
that counts.
cannot. Yeah,
you can.
Yeah,
Please do. So you can leave a review on Facebook, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Spotify, we're getting close to 1,300 reviews over there, or ratings on Spotify, which is awesome. So make sure before this episode ends, if you have not left a review on Apple Podcasts, please do. You ready to have this conversation?
Let's go.
All right, bro.
So today's conversation of dead people walking. I mean, Halloween. You gotta throw a little Halloweeny phrase in there. Halloweeny.
I love it.
Halloweeny phrase. But
The Walking
today's
Dead.
particular topic is not just any Walking Dead, but the dead that were raised from the tombs when Christ died and was raised.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Which is interesting because this isn't preached on very much, I feel like, from pulpits.
it is because it's just like a little bloop. It's like a little bloop, and then moved on. Like Matthew drops it in there, and then it's like, here's this. And
hey, by the way, these dead people walked around, and so wait, what?
Yeah, so we're gonna get into it a little bit, and
Okay.
I got quite a few notes from quite a few different sources on this. I gotta.
Oh, dang.
that hurts.
You have a lot of notes.
I do have a lot of notes, so it's going to be a fun-filled evening, my good man.
All right, let's do this.
Matthew 27:45 through 54. I want to read it in context a little
right,
bit.
let's do
So from noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over the whole land.
Because Jesus just died.
Right.
Or about to die.
Well, about to die. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama, whatever that one
Sabachthani.
is. There you go. Thank you. Man, that was some good Greek.
Well, I
right
said it with a little bit of a lisp, too, my bad.
Sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you abandoned me? When some of those standing there heard this, they said, he's calling for Elijah. Immediately, one of them ran, which is an interesting fact, not for this podcast, but for a different one. Immediately, one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a stick and offered him a drink. Because this was like a medicinal, like help with the pain thing. I know you know, but I'm saying it for our listeners.
I got you.
But the rest said, let's see if Elijah comes to save him. But Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and gave up his spirit. Suddenly, The curtain of the sanctuary was torn in two from the top to the bottom. The earth quaked and the rocks were split. The tombs were also open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And they came out of the tombs after his resurrection, which we'll get into that.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
Okay.
Entered the holy city and appeared to many. When the centurion and those with him who were keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquakes and the things that had happened, they were terrified and said, truly, this man was the Son of God. So, before we get too nitty-gritty into the whole people just coming out the tombs and everything and going into Jerusalem, just being like, hey there, Anelpa, how you doing?
I'm picturing like a Hotel Transylvania with like the mummy with just like the rags falling off, like you can see through his body when the rags fall off.
He said that all I could see is like one guy going up and he goes, hey, look, there's one, two, Sorry.
We're
Anyways,
sorry.
Sesame Street. So what major events took place? So we're going to take a quick little, we're going to go from 30,000 foot view to like a 10,000 foot view. It's not down into the depths, but we're going to take a little bit of a view in there.
Okay.
You like that?
I do.
All right. So some of the major events took place. This comes from two different places, and it was from BibleStudy.org, and the other place was NeverThirsty, were the two websites that this stuff comes from. All this will be in the show notes. For those that were present on the day that Jesus died, there were at least four major signs that screamed loudly that Jesus was not an ordinary man. He was, in fact, God. The first was an unusual darkness that was discussed by secular historians. Historians attempted to determine how this could have occurred. Today, we know there is no scientific explanation for what happened. The historians state the darkness occurred in the middle of the day. The historians, like Josephus, said it happened in the middle of the day. Since Passover had started, there was a full moon. Since Passover had started, there was a full moon since Passover occurred at a full moon. A solar eclipse was not possible since the sun would have been on the far side of the earth. Also, a solar eclipse cannot occur during a full moon. What happened was a miracle with no scientific explanation. That's first.
Which, because I've heard that scientific explanation many times,
right,
of like, oh, it just was a whatever.
It was a solar eclipse. It
just happens.
Yeah. And that's typically what they say. It was a solar eclipse, but based upon the time period of when Passover is, it couldn't have been because the earth or the sun is somewhere. It's not. It won't cover the moon. So the second sign that occurred was the temple veil was torn from the top to the bottom, and not by human hands. The temple veil was 4 inches thick. Can you imagine the temple veil being?
About to say, I'm like 4 inches thick.
I mean, 4 inches thick is like big time.
That's a big old book.
That's right. So that and could not have been torn easily. So this is where that Bible study. Or I wanted to get a little bit more. So it says the veil mentioned in the Gospels that tore when Jesus died hung between the Holy of Holies and the holy place.
Right. It's what separated man from God.
Correct. So the veil itself was 30 by 60 feet big.
Big.
And had a thickness of between 4 to 6 inches is what they're saying. So the miraculous tearing of the veil showed that the atoning death of Jesus for the sins of mankind made possible direct access to the Father. So I just wanted to make sure that...
Right, and so far when we're looking at I feel like we're talking about like Holy Week right now, man. So
right.
We're looking at the death of Jesus, and it went dark for 3 hours, which was physically impossible,
right,
according to what we have with the study of the stars and the time frames and the movement of the earth and all that kind of stuff. And then also in the temple, the literally most sacred thing in that temple was torn. Because literally when the high priest would go in, he would have bells on him and tied to a rope so that if he died they could drag him out because they weren't even going to walk in there.
Yeah, that's the imperative thing, right? Is that if they went in and they had not been through the cleansing rituals and presented themselves as holy, then they would die instantly upon entrance, and that's why they would drag them out.
And now all of a sudden...
And so the whole veil was like, and God's glory was displayed. But,
it went yeet.
But beyond that, I mean, 4 to 6 inches thick fabric that's 30 by 60 feet. I mean, that's a massive, to be like, okay, so just imagine, right? So if it's 30 feet high, that's 30 feet of a 4 to 6 inch veil that's torn. Or if it's 60 feet high, it's a 4 to 6 inch veil that's torn.
That's wild.
All the way from the top to the bottom.
Like, I can't even fathom that.
30 feet, all right? So even if it's long ways, right? If it's 30 vertically and 60 horizontally, we'll just say
which
that.
Is freaking huge.
How long would it have taken them to, somebody like would have noticed somebody taking up a ladder or something like that to go and try to like tear that,
and that's the
right?
thing is,
it's torn from top to bottom.
Like I've even heard arguments of like, oh, you know, like the idea of, and we'll get into it, like the disciples stealing Jesus's body, and then someone could have ripped the temple. I'm like, do you not understand the holiness and sacredness of the Jewish religion?
Right.
Like, you don't just walk up in there and be like, I'm going to rip this.
Yeah.
Like, no.
Yeah, you would die faster than Jesus did.
Absolutely. But so far, we've already seen two miraculous, we can call them miracles, but I would say miraculous or just holy crap moment things of the darkness.
Some major signs.
That's a theological term, holy crapness. So, like, holy crap things going down.
That's in the Marc Hyde version.
The Marc Hyde version. So we see the eclipse happening, which is nuts.
Yeah.
Which isn't an eclipse. It's just the darkness. And then we see the veil being torn in two all of a sudden. Whoa.
Right.
And so
the next one was the next sign was the occurrence of an earthquake. And obviously we know no ordinary person can cause an earthquake, right?
Nope.
I mean, I don't care how fat you are. You can't fall down.
Supposedly Tesla had a machine that can cause an earthquake to come across the entire world, but he died and his planes disappeared.
And here's the other thing. Tesla was 1,800 years later after the fact. So,
but nobody's just as dumb.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure,
like it's not just something that just happened.
Sure. So the fourth sign is that many graves were opened after the resurrection. Then those in the now open tombs were resurrected and walked around the city. So all four miracles revealed that Jesus was the Son of God, right? So these four major events happened that proved that Jesus was no ordinary man, but he was in fact God. So read the testimony of the centurion and soldiers keeping guard over Jesus as they proclaimed, truly, this was the Son of God, Matthew 27:54. The total darkness and the tombs opening up on their own cannot be caused by any human. These were signs at the time of the crucifixion to everyone present that Jesus was God. And that's true, right? So think about tombs, right? Tombs back in that time. When Jesus was laid in a tomb, what was that tomb?
Stone.
So it was a cave.
It was
sealed, right? It was a sealed like tomb, like cave. So these had to have been split open, right? The graves were open, and then some of the translations says split open, right? So you're splitting rock,
right,
to reveal the dead inside.
Like, and so far we've seen, and when you think about like even some, I'm not sure how much truth this has in it, but when you see some of Jesus' miracles over nature,
right,
you see even right now there's control over the sun and the moon and the light. You see control over the environment with the earthquakes. You see control over man-made physical objects. You also see it in terms of God's own direction. And then all of a sudden, because of Jesus' death, everything was impacted,
right,
in that entire area,
right.
But then, the one thing that's kind of crazy to me, and honestly, I'll be honest with you, I didn't realize this. I'm sure I've heard it before, but it clicked when I was, reading really quickly about this, because I'm like, let me just read this passage, make sure we're good to go. And I saw that they didn't come out of the tombs until like 3 days later.
So we're going to talk about that.
Like, what were they doing for wait, so Jesus died and all of a sudden the tombs were open, but then 3 days later they'd be like, oh, now we gonna wake up.
So there's actually two different schools of thought on that, right?
Oh, really? Okay.
Which is why the next point says, when did the saints rise? So there's two different thoughts on it, and we're going to read through them.
Okay.
So the first one comes from the Gospel Coalition. The second one is going to come from Bible.org again.
Okay.
So here's what the first one says. When did the saints rise? The answer to this is found in Matthew 27:52 through, I think that was supposed to say 53, not 23. The tombs were also open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And they came out of the tombs after his resurrection, entered the holy city, and appeared to many. After Jesus' own resurrection, the saints went and appeared in the holy city, Matthew 23:53. Some have wondered whether these saints were raised on Good Friday, but then sat in an open tomb before going to the city, into the city on Easter Sunday, which is out of behavior.
Which I
right?
feel like that's not. I don't feel like that's it.
So a better scenario emerges when we notice how Matthew interlocks the scene with the next chapter, namely earthquakes coinciding with a tomb opening of both the saints and Jesus, and the subtle foreshadowing of Jesus' resurrection in 27:53, which Matthew doesn't actually narrate until 28:5 through 6. He times the saints' resurrection's appearance after Jesus' own, but narrates theirs out of order to deal with the saints in one fell swoop and thereby maintain the focus on Jesus in the next chapter.
Yeah, it's like, oh, by the way, these guys, the tombs were raised, and then after Jesus raised again, then they started walking around, but let's get back to Jesus.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Wait
it's
a
just
minute.
like a blip in time.
Wait a minute.
So, but think about it, right? Before I go on with this, back then, in the time Matthew was writing this, it may have been common knowledge because Matthew was writing to Jewish people, right? Mm-hmm. So there may have been a lot of those Jews in Jerusalem during that time.
Well,
right?
they would have been because it's Passover.
Well, exactly. So there would have been a huge buzz going on about all these dead people coming into town. Hey, Aunt Margaret just showed up and she's been dead for 3 years. Like,
now I do wonder though, and I don't know if this is part of the school of thought. That's some of the school of thought that I was raised in a little bit too, and read, is more the fact of, were these people that maybe weren't dead for long?
We're gonna get into
dead
that
for short, kind of like how, like, you know, oh, they were like when Jesus raised the girl. Like, oh, he's not dead. She was just asleep, and then she raised the kid.
There's two schools of thought with that as well. So see, we got some things.
There's a lot of opinions on this. Apparently,
there is. So all right, so let's get back into it. So we're talking about him and basically Matthew just like dealing with the saints raising out of the tombs opening and them raising out in one fell swoop there, right? Mm-hmm. So it could refocus on Jesus. So the sequence would then follow, if that is indeed true, is Jesus died, saints' tombs open, Jesus' tombs open, Jesus is raised, saints are raised, eyewitness appearance of both. This preserves Jesus' place as the true first fruits of resurrection, 1 Corinthians 15:23, rather than the certain other saints preceding him. Matthew doesn't tell us what happened to these saints after they appeared in the holy city. Some suggest this was their final resurrection and that they later went to heaven with Jesus. Others suggest these saints were only temporarily brought back to life and would eventually die and await the final resurrection, like Lazarus, among with many others, from John 11. Certainty is difficult because Matthew is silent. What we do know is that they appeared in Jerusalem, the mother city that had rejected Jesus, as proof of his victory. So, going back into that little paragraph right there that we just read, you could see that there's two schools of thought, right? One was that these saints that were raised were given new bodies. Mm-hmm. They were given their resurrection bodies.
And I've heard that before.
And that they went to be, and when Christ ascended, they also ascended, but the focus was still on Jesus, right? So that's one school of thought. And then the other school of thought is exactly what you were speaking to. Maybe these saints were followers of Christ during his earthly ministry that had passed away and had been buried and had not been dead long. And then they were raised. And so there wasn't the because
it also doesn't say how many of them. It just says the tombs were, where is it? Suddenly, the curtain of the sanctuary was torn in two from top to bottom. The earthquake, the rocks were split. The tombs were also opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised.
So there's another third school of thought.
It doesn't say many. It just says the tombs.
So there's another.
Just that many.
There's a third school of thought which I didn't even put in the notes, but I'll speak on it.
Okay.
Just because it's a more of an obscure one. At least I don't think I put it in the notes.
Okay. Now we're getting real Halloween spooky. Okay.
So there's some that believe that the 500 witnesses that Christ witnessed to, there was the 500. And I don't know where they got the 500 from. I remember the 5,000. Wasn't there 5,000 or was it 500? I can't remember now.
Oh, it's the fact that Jesus went and ministered to 500.
So the 500 was those people, were these saints, right? And that is who he was referring to. And then there's other people that think, hey, maybe it was Adam and Eve that were part of these saints.
Or was that with Paul when he said he appeared to these people and these people and these people, and last of all, he appeared to me? Was that the Apostle Paul?
That was Paul.
No,
it was a gospel thing, and I couldn't remember where they got it from. Like I said, it was a quick passing thing, and I'm like, all right, that one's kind of far out there, so I don't think I put it in the notes because it was so far out there. I don't think so either. Maybe I did because I forgot. I wanted to. Let's see here. No. All right, I'm going to move on, and while you look that up.
Okay.
So, this is that's what the Gospel Coalition said. This is what the Bible.org says. A third event mentioned was recorded only by Matthew. The tombs of many holy or righteous people, in verse 52, were open, probably at Jerusalem cemetery. The NIV suggests that these saints were resurrected when Jesus died and then went into Jerusalem after Jesus' resurrection. A number of commentators agree with this view. Many others, however, say that since Christ is the first fruits of the dead, 1 Corinthians 15:23, their resurrection did not occur until he was raised. In this view, the phrase "after Jesus' resurrection" goes with the words "were raised to life and came out of the tombs." This is possible in the Greek, and it is suggested in the KJV and the NASB. The tombs were broken apart at Christ's death, probably by the earthquake, thus heralding Christ's triumph in death over sin. But the bodies were not raised till Christ was raised. These people returned to Jerusalem, the holy city, where they were recognized by friends and family, like Lazarus in John 11:43 and 44, Jarius, his daughter, Luke 8:52 through 56, and the widow of Nain's son, Luke 7:13 through 15. They too passed through physical death again, or some say they may have been raised with glorified bodies like the Lord's. Walvord suggests
John Walvord stuff is good.
Suggests this event was a fulfillment of the feast of the first fruits of harvest mentioned in Leviticus 23:10 through 14, which we'll read here in a sec. On that occasion, as a token of the coming harvest, the people would bring a handful of grain to the priest. The resurrection of these saints occurred after Jesus himself was raised, is a token of the coming harvest when all the saints will be raised. And this is what Leviticus 23, I went back to 9 because it makes more sense contextually, through 14. So this is what verse 9 is that I added. The Lord spoke to Moses. So context,
now we know context. Now we know context.
Who is he speaking to, right? So the Lord spoke to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them, when you enter the land I am giving you and reap its harvest, you are to bring the first sheaf of your harvest to the priest. He will present the sheaf before the Lord so that you may be accepted. The priest is to present it on the day after Sabbath." So if Christ died on a Friday and Sabbath was on a Saturday and he rose on a Sunday, what's the day after a Sabbath? Sunday, right?
Sunday, right.
On the day
the
you present the sheaf, you are to offer a year-old lamb without blemish as a burnt offering to the Lord.
Oh.
It's a grain offering. Its grain offering is to be 4 quarts of fine flour mixed with oil as a food offering to the Lord and a pleasing aroma. And its drinking offering will be 1 quart of wine, which I thought was interesting because of the wine that they offered to Christ.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then the bread and the wine that Christ broke with his disciples. Not that that's actually coinciding. To me, it's like, oh, this is kind of cool. You must not eat bread, roasted grain, or new grain until this very day, and until you have brought the offering to your God. This is to be a permanent statute throughout your generations wherever you live. So I thought it was interesting that he pointed to that. I mean, I could see where he could get that from.
Well, especially where we're talking about this is to be a permanent statute. Like, this isn't supposed to go away. But if Jesus came to fulfill the law of Moses,
right,
Jesus would have had to fulfill this.
Right, exactly.
Because you can't just neglect this part if it's not been fulfilled.
Well, statute is part of the law, right?
Right.
So
like
it would be a fulfillment.
You will
of
be
this.
dead if you don't do this. Like, that's kind of the statute.
So it would definitely be seen as a fulfillment of this statute.
Oh, that's interesting.
It was interesting.
That's
I thought.
really fascinating.
So,
okay.
So we've talked about a couple different things here, right? About the saints, and let's go back and I'm going to actually read that verse again. I'm going to read just 52 through 53.
Bring it back full speed?
Yep. So the tombs were also open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And they came out of the tombs after his resurrection. So the tombs were also open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. So, and they came out of the tombs after his resurrection, entered the holy city, and appeared to many. So, Mark, what's your opinion on it? After reading that and hearing all of that, what say you, my good man?
The only thing that seems to make sense. I mean, now obviously, again, I'm looking at a translation, but
Sure.
with what I have in front of me with the CSB, it's trying to say the tombs were also open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and they came out of the tombs after his resurrection.
Yeah.
So it's like, is it the tomb broke first and then 3 days later? Because it's like, okay, so
which would make sense, right?
But it's also, why would dead? But maybe not, because think about it this way as well.
If the bodies weren't raised until Christ was raised, right? If the tombs were broken at his death,
but people would be checking that out, because if tombs are broken up, they'd be checking them out. So I'm like, they can't just be sitting there alive until Jesus rose again from the dead.
Because here's the thing, right? You go back to, we're working through this. I love it. So you go back and it says, and they came out of the tombs after his resurrection, entered the holy city. So imagine if you go to the tombs and they're already raised. Imagine what you'd be doing.
That wouldn't work. That wouldn't work.
Right? When the centurion and those with him who were keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and the things that happened, they were terrified. But it says they were watching over Christ and saw the earthquakes and the things that happen. So,
but again, this is
it
Matthew
before,
looking back.
is it
But
at-
again,
right.
this is Matthew looking back. And so I think it's kind of, those verses are two separate things.
Yes.
With the fact of when it happened, the tombs were broken, and then they were raised from the dead. But it wasn't until 3 days later that they walked out.
Right.
Like, so I think it's one of those things where we have to look at the context of what's trying to be communicated. And because what all Matthew is trying to communicate is, there was an earthquake, and then some tombs went, and then some people went, and like woke back up. Like, that's the story.
Right.
And then they went into Jerusalem, and they didn't present themselves to the priest, but just the fact of like,
No,
we ain't dead.
Right.
And so I guess the thing that I'm not so concerned about, so what did they do in those 3 days? Because from what I see, I'm like, there would be no way that who knows how many people were just alive in the tomb for 3 days doing nothing.
But then again, who raised them? And why were they raised before Christ?
Well, okay, so who raised the other people?
Christ.
Jesus raised the other people, right?
Correct.
Who did the disciples raise people from the dead from, in whose name?
Christ.
In Christ's name. And Jesus was raised again from the dead through the power of the Holy Spirit. And the same power that raised Christ from the dead now resides in us. We see that truth in the New Testament. But if Jesus is the one who has control over death and life,
the Holy Spirit wasn't sent at that point.
No, right. So, from what I would think is the fact of they could not have been raised from the dead unless Jesus
was alive,
raised them from
as
the dead and was
first
alive.
fruits, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians. So that's kind of where I'm leaning towards too. Of that, the tombs were probably broken.
But nothing happened
during the earthquake. But then Christ raised the saints from the dead as part of the first fruits in the fulfillment of Leviticus. He himself,
which is pretty dope. Like, that's a pretty dope connection,
right? And then the saints as the first fruits offered unto him.
Yep.
During that time. Now we're going to get into the question of were the bodies literally raised, or were they metaphysically raised or metaphorically raised? Because there are questions about it, and if so, we're going to go back into that question. Did they have glorified bodies and went and ascended with Christ, or did they, like Lazarus, like Jarius' daughter, die again?
Now, see, that's a good question.
So let's dig into that a little bit, right? We're going to dig into that of where the body's literally raised and who are the saints being raised on that day. We're going to kind of tie those two together. So this comes from Christianity.com. It says, these people rising from the dead is such an odd verse, and nothing more is said about it. There we are left to speculate beyond the text, which is exactly what this whole podcast is about right now, is just speculating based upon the text, what we think based upon the text. We aren't the only people who have found this passage strange and mysterious. There are 3 theories regarding this verse. Number 1, the saints were apparatuses or ghosts. However, the text states the graves open and people got up and walked around, much like Lazarus or other biblical resurrections. So ghost seems like a stretch.
A little bit of a stretch.
So number 2, the saints were bodily resurrections like Lazarus. These saints lived again, but not in glorified immortal bodies. They lived and died again. And number 3, the saints were glorified resurrections. They were given new bodies and ascended after a time, as Jesus did. Excuse me. Sorry. Coffee burps.
No, you're good. I'm reading some other passages.
Most scholars and historical writers like Thomas Aquinas choose the second option. Aquinas differentiated between perfect and imperfect resurrection. Perfect, meaning complete, meant a resurrection into an immortal new body, which we will have in heaven. Imperfect, meaning incomplete, still in the mortal flesh, and would grow and die. Aquinas and others believe these people mentioned in Matthew were raised in the imperfect sense. So, going back.
In the imperfect? What do you mean by the imperfect?
Imperfect meaning in the mortal body. He said perfect means, mortal. Perfect in the perfect sense, meaning immortal, heavenly body, like we're going to heaven.
Gotcha.
So if we go back, let's read it again. We're going to read the scripture a lot. The tombs were also open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And they came out of the tombs after his resurrection, entered the holy city, and appeared to many.
All right, so let's break this down real fast. So
right.
when it talks about falling asleep, right? The only other time when you see the word, "Oh, they're not dead; they've just fallen asleep," was it the girl or was it the mother that Jesus raised from the dead?
So that was with Jarius' daughter,
right? And she said, "Oh,"
and I think it was.
In and goes,
I think
why
it was.
y'all crying? She's just sleeping.
I think it was with Peter's mother-in-law too, wasn't it? I think it was both. He said that she's just asleep.
She didn't die though. Was it listed that she died? I think it just made it better.
I thought she had died. Hang on. Fact check me.
But either way, so while you're looking that up,
go.
So we see that when Jesus is like, nah, man, when she ain't dead, she's just asleep, and she woke up. And so you see that their bodies who were asleep or rose again. I see that, and I'm like, I don't think these are glorified bodies either, because again, after we die and go to heaven,
you're right. She was just sick.
Okay, she was just sick. But the Bible says that we aren't going to be given our own glorified bodies in heaven.
Right.
We're not going to be given our glorified bodies until the second return of Jesus, when he establishes his new throne.
Correct.
And that's why so many people talk, and this is why it irks me when people talk about the whole goal of living on earth is to get to heaven and to go to heaven when you die. And I'm like, that's not the goal. Like, the goal is living a perfect place with a perfect ruler again.
So let's look at it, right? Let's look at historically, like you're kind of talking, right? Mm-hmm. You're talking, okay, what does it look like, and when has it been said before that we have instances? Let's break this down and look at it from a logical standpoint.
Logical? Okay.
So from a logical standpoint, Christ raised people from the dead, right?
Yes.
So we go back to that. Christ raised people, or the Holy Spirit who also raised Christ, but that was after Christ.
They was dead, and then
now
was
they're
not
alive.
dead.
Well, so it's important. So Christ raised people from the dead.
Yep.
Those people that Christ raised from the dead, did they have mortal bodies or immortal bodies when they were raised from the dead?
They were still mortals.
They were mortal bodies. So historically, we're looking at mortal bodies, right? And then I would assume these people, I guess that's speculation, so we're going to take the speculation out of it. What was the purpose when Christ raised those people from the dead when he was in his earthly ministry?
It was the point that he is God.
He was
like
showing,
he is the Messiah.
He was showing
it showed his power.
So this would be, again, doing the same thing, showing he is indeed, in fact, the Son of God, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So if we're following the train of thought and comparing apples to apples of resurrections here with Christ, especially because at that point, right, when Christ rose from the grave, what did he say to... We've talked about this before. He said, something like, "Do not touch me, for I haven't not ascended to the Father yet, or I haven't gone to the Father." What's that scripture? Sorry, this is typical Chris and Mark that haven't got everything prepared.
Was that when Mary fell at the feet of Jesus when she came to the tomb or something like that? Well, no, that was the angel. But here's the thing, though. My other question too is going back to Jesus with his resurrected body. People always say that he had his resurrected eternal body. I think Jesus had the same body as when he died. So like he didn't have a glorified body. So he just had his body.
He would have had to, at least before the ascension, because he said to Thomas, "Here the nails are. Here's the holes in my hands. Here's the hole in my side."
Like it was still Jesus. Like he was still beat up.
So look up John 20:17 real fast for me.
Sword drill,
go. 5 points. No.
Beat you homeschoolers.
10 points to the Afro Man. 2017.
Oh, here we go. So let's talk about Mary Magdalene sees the risen Lord. I'm gonna go back up to 16. Jesus said to her, Mary. Turning around, she said to him in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. Don't cling to me, Jesus told her, since I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and tell them that I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. And then Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, I have seen the Lord. And she told them what he had said to her.
So Christ at that point, right, when Mary first sees him, had not ascended to the Father, right? So we know that his body was recognized with the holes. And you would think a perfect body would have that.
But Jesus had the ability to blind their eyes so that they didn't know it was Jesus, which I think is fascinating. But they're like, oh, he was supposed to be the gardener.
But he also was able to, they were going to throw him off a cliff, and then he he passed through the crowd.
Right.
At the same time, too, in his earthly ministry. So he had some abilities to be able to do stuff. But what I'm talking about is that why would Christ, when he raised people from the tombs in their immortal bodies?
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense from what he did on his earthly ministry. He himself, at that point when he was resurrected, had not ascended to the Father in his immortal body. Mm-hmm. He was still recognizable, and he may still be to this day. We don't know. It's speculation, but we would assume that something has happened since then. Mm-hmm. And so, following the train of thought, it would seem to me, right? This is the conclusion that I'm drawing, is that these people had either not been dead very long and had raised and were recognizable and were in their mortal body resurrected, right? So just like Lazarus, just like Jarius' daughter. Or B, they were saints in the graveyard that maybe Christ, as he was known to heal and bring limbs back
out
and
looking
all that
like
stuff.
Frankenstein.
So, no, they came back and they looked fine, just like Christ had been able to heal bodies before. And yet, but they were still in immortal bodies. I do not think they were in their immortal state. Their resurrected state.
No. I don't think. No. It was, and it was one of those things where Jesus raised them from the dead to prove that he has the power over.
Well, it was
death.
It was a sign of who he was at that point. Like, what other time in history have you known a mass graveyard exiting people and going into the city? Never. Never. So,
just in The Conjuring.
That's something. That's something.
I've never seen The Conjuring.
Pet Cemetery. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So from Mike and our deduction, right?
I would say no. They're legitimate. It's their bodies and people would recognize.
That's
them.
what. That's
what I say. Their bodies, people would recognize.
So who were the saints being raised?
And that's my biggest question. So who the heck were they? So that's what I want to know.
Tell
me who it is.
This is going to be from Christianity.com and NeverThirsty again, because your boy is like, I'll let the theologians talk about it, not me, right? So it says the Bible, this is what Christianity.com says. It says the Bible isn't clear as to the people who rose from the dead, but in context, we can safely make a few assumptions. You ready to hear the few assumptions?
I'm ready for the few assumptions.
First, these were graves close to Jerusalem, not in the city, but outside, likely in the same area where Jesus was interred. Interred? Is that right? Interred? Interred? I'm going to say interred. After his death on the cross. The Jewish law instructed that dead bodies be removed from the camp or the city. While the graves being open was a big deal, it happened in a remote place, relatively unnoticed. The graves had to have been close enough that they were able to walk into Jerusalem. So that's for assumption number one. So it was outside the city, but was close.
Yep.
Second assumption. These were people that had recently died. Yes, it's unclear, but the scripture suggests they were recognized. They weren't legends of the faith like Abraham or Isaac. Their graves weren't close. To Jerusalem, and if they had been, they would have been mentioned, which it would have been pretty significant. Like, hey, Abraham rose from the dead.
It only makes sense if they were just normal people,
right?
So just normal Joe Schmo.
The second assumption we can make is that they were recognizable people of recent death that people in the town would have recognized and listened to. All right, so the third assumption is these were likely people of faith known for being good Jews and followers of God, hence the term saints. Saints means holy ones. First used in the Old Testament as a label for angels. In Daniel, people were first regarded as saints in the context of God's coming kingdom. The New Testament writers used saints exclusively for people that were born again. So that was Christianity.com's 3 assumptions that they make of who these saints were.
Okay.
Sorry.
Coffee burp?
Yep.
Or was that bubbly burp?
Probably a little both. All right, so this one's going to come from the NeverThirsty again. And it says this: notice that the people who were raised were many and not all. These saints were under the old covenant, since Hebrews 8:6 through 9:28 reveals that Jesus' death and resurrection instituted a new covenant. Thus, these saints were some of the Old Testament saints. They received their glorified bodies when Jesus died on the cross. John MacArthur states this: who were the saints? Who were they? Saints. What are saints? Holy ones from the Old Testament era who were waiting for the resurrection, who had been waiting perhaps a long time. When Jesus died, their spirits came from the abode where righteous people dwell and were joined in glorified bodies that came out of those graves.
Okay, so MacArthur would say that they're not recently dead.
That they are saints of old.
Okay.
So also notice that...
And they had their resurrected states, not just a normal...
Correct, that they had the immortal body. So also notice that there's a break in time between the resurrection of these saints and the appearance after Christ's resurrection. Many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised and coming out of the tombs after his resurrection. Matthew 27, 52, and 53 from the NASB. The passage clearly states that these saints came out of their tombs after Jesus was resurrected. This is an important comment because 1 Corinthians 15:20 states that Jesus was the first fruits of those who had fallen asleep. These saints could not have been resurrected before Christ. Thus, we should conclude that the tombs were opened after Jesus' death. Then, as Matthew 27:53 states, these Old Testament saints were resurrected after Jesus was resurrected. Now, everyone was raised from the grave. Notice the words, many bodies of the saints. Those who returned to life were Old Testament saints. Only a portion of the Old Testament saints returned to life at the time. However, we do not know how many or who they were, but people in the city saw them. This was a partial celebration and foretaste of the final resurrection of the Old Testament saints prophesied by Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. And the New Testament saints at the time of the rapture, 1 Thessalonians 4:16. The rest of the Old Testament saints will be resurrected after the second coming of Christ and before the millennial kingdom begins, Revelation 20, verse 4. So this is kind of the opposite side of what we had just read from the previous group.
But see, when I read that, man, I'm like, I feel like John MacArthur is doing a massive catapult.
Yeah, I think there's way more speculation that I'm okay with.
Because even with again the new bodies, and maybe I need to do some of my reading because I firmly believe that we won't get our new bodies until Jesus returns and then establishes a new throne. Right. So that means, and he's a pre-trib, pre-mill, which means there's a 7-year tribulation, and then at the first rapture of the saints, and then the second, so we can't even get it till then. But
there's a first, second, and third in a pre-trib, right? So first is the taking away the church.
Yes.
The second is for the
return of Jesus.
The return of Jesus. Those who had served, and then the third were those during the 1,000-year reign that had died or fallen asleep.
And I believe that's MacArthur's theology. So I'm like, how does that coincide with the fact that you just said it's their glorified body? Because again, if it's their glorified body, those bodies are designed to never see death again.
Right, correct.
So that doesn't make sense to me. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I feel
like he catapults over some stuff.
I think it's a little far-reaching, but I also highly respect MacArthur.
Oh, I respect him too. I just think he catapulted that much.
I just disagree with him on this particular instance, right? And there's several instances that he probably disagrees with my theology. So I don't know.
And again, this is speculation too.
And that's
what
the thing,
type
right?
of body.
So he's speculating, we're speculating, and the people from Christianity.com are speculating. We're all speculating at this point.
But to break this whole, I think the whole picture, so we're speculating over the fact of what's the body like, who were the saints, but the real focus is the fact of, nah, bro, some dead fools came back to life.
And we're like
wait
walking around, and everybody knew they were dead people.
Now, see,
Matthew knew they were dead people.
This is where my brain struggles a little bit, though. And I don't know if you have this in your notes to talk about it or not. Nope. Okay, good. I'll lean into it. So I know that this is one of Bart Ehrman's accusations against the validity of the New Testament, because he goes, if a bunch of people just came up out of the grave alive, why ain't nobody writing this crap down? Well, Matthew did, but why did nobody else? And then Matthew also used sources. So why doesn't Matthew because Matthew they believe, used Luke in another source as this, and then Luke used Matthew and Mark, and
Mark is originally thought to have been wrote first.
Yes, and I agree with that.
Mark was the scribe, Peter was the narrator.
Correct,
is what is believed.
So it really should be the gospel according to Peter. That's what you and I both believe that too.
Correct.
But
not to be confused with the extra biblical material.
No.
The Gospel of Peter.
Yeah, no, different.
Mark. We're talking Mark.
Different. Not me, Mark. The good Mark that ditched Paul.
With the K.
The one that ditched Paul.
John Mark.
John Mark, not me. But Matthew's the only one to talk about it. Luke doesn't talk about it.
Right.
John doesn't talk about it. And neither does Acts. Neither does any of the other apostles in the rest of the New Testament.
Was it not mentioned by anybody else because of the demographic in which they were writing to? Whereas Matthew was writing to Jews.
Cool. Still pretty cool.
As we stated earlier, the Jews would have been in Jerusalem for the celebration of Passover.
Right.
So they would have been there. So who was Matthew writing to?
The Jews.
To the Jews, right? That was his demographic and whom he was writing to. It was not the demographic of John, of Luke, or of Mark.
Right. Bart Ehrman's argument, though, is the fact that if this was such a pinnacle thing that this happened, why is it not mentioned anywhere else? And then why is it not mentioned in any extra biblical sources? Because, and we can have the argument of the fact of extra biblical sources be like, well, they were just never dead in the first place, you idiots.
Sure.
Like, y'all trying to do tax evasion over here. They ain't dead.
Why are there just rumors of how the apostles died?
Right.
A lot of them aren't clear-cut, written down historical facts. They're rumors or traditions of the church.
Our view from the Bible perspective and the Christian perspective is the fact of it's because their deaths didn't matter.
Right. So, again, I think exactly what we talked about earlier.
That they don't matter.
Matthew did not want to focus on it, right?
Right.
A focus on this. It was kind of a brief mentioning of just another proof.
Yeah, I was like, hey, all this stuff happened. Yo, these people rose again from the dead. Hey, let's back to Jesus.
And back to Jesus again.
It was kind of one of those, and back to you, Bob.
But again, moments. Matthew is known as a meticulous, he's out of all four Gospels, his seems to be the most meticulously written, right? Of certain aspects that are not in any other. There's I think it was 10 or 20%, I can't remember, of Matthew is not found anywhere in any other gospel. That there's a certain percentage that he goes into such detail about that we're assuming the other writers of the other gospels just thought were trivial facts, but Matthew did it for a reason because of who his audience and his demographic was in which he was speaking to. He's got the Bible whipped back out. I love it. What you got for us, buddy?
I'm in
What you
Daniel.
thinking? Oh, you're reading Daniel 12 too?
Daniel 12, 1 through 2, because this is saying right here the fact of not everyone was raised from the grave. Notice the word, many abide to the saints, those who return to life were Old Testament saints. This is going back to this idea from NeverThirsty. Only a portion of the Old Testament saints returned to life at this time. However, we don't know how many and who they were, but people in the city saw them. This was a partial celebration and a foretaste of the final resurrection of all the Old Testament saints prophesied by Daniel 12:2. So I want to read it because,
let's go.
And this is the beautiful thing about prophecy is I am a firm believer in already not yet. So this leads right into my worldview for that. So Daniel 12, I'm going to start at 1.
Yep.
And then read 2. At that time, Michael, the great prince who stands watch over your people, will rise up. There will be a time of distress such as never has occurred. Such nations came into being until that time. But at that time, all of your people who are found written in the book will escape. Many who sleep in the dust of the earth will wake. Some to eternal life, and some to disgrace and eternal contempt.
So see, that to me sounds like the end.
That's the end time.
That's the end of the earth.
That seems like the end of the earth. Like that doesn't seem much about now.
Again, that's still kind of a stretch.
It's a little tasty taste.
It's still kind of a stretch there.
Right.
Of where they're going with that. I think it's a stretch. I'm not saying it's wrong because we're all speculating at this point.
Right.
I'm not going to go out and say they're flat out wrong. I'm just saying for me, the way I'm looking at it and trying to break it down, it doesn't make sense and it seems like a stretch.
But we also got to go back to, okay, so if we lean to why each gospel was written,
sure.
John Mark was written from Peter, and it was just kind of like a boom, boom, boom. Here's a highlight of Jesus' life.
Yep.
Luke was a lot more storytelling
for Theophilus.
John was focused, like he only focused on like 7 pillars of the I am statements. And it was written so the way you may believe he's the Son of God.
Right. It was pointing to him being the Son of God.
And so if Matthew's talking about all these different feasts, if he's talking about all these Jewish references,
he's trying to point to all the fulfillments that Christ fulfilled,
including
of the Old Testament,
the ability to raise people from the dead. Which, when you look at what the messianic promised one, the Christ, was supposed to do, this is part of it, because the Pharisees and the Sadducees argued about, is there even a resurrection? Or when we're dead, are we dead? Like, is there a second resurrection? And this is Jesus saying, "Hey, you fools!" Yup. Like, yes,
it's me.
Yes.
It's me.
And so when I see this, I think there's a whole bunch of different things going on. And when you see, okay, so what's the importance of all this then? There's got to be a level of the fact of it happened.
Sure.
Matthew put it down that it happened. The centurion saw all these things that went, oh, dang, like he is the Son of God. Like, my goodness.
Right.
But I feel like there are some things that we just don't understand in Matthew because we're a bunch of Western people reading a book written 2,000 years ago to a bunch of Jews.
Of that time.
Right. It's like that meme that I posted inside the Facebook group. Look, it was a little skirt, but it was really funny. The fact of like, we know the definition of a butt dial and booty call, but like 2,000 years ago, they won't know the difference because it's same two different words put together, and that's why you don't fully understand what's going on in the Bible. I'm like, oh, that's a valid statement.
Now, we do have a lot of literacy from back then, so we can sort of understand the culture and the custom and the biblical mannerisms back then. But yeah, I mean, I could see the first fruits, and that's why he was talking about the fulfillment of that Leviticus, because he was pointing. He's the one that's pointing that nothing shall pass away from the law, not one dot nor until all the law is fulfilled, and that comes from Matthew 5. That's where Matthew is talking about that, and so this would be a fulfillment of that Levitical law, and maybe that's why he put it in there, because it would be a fulfillment of the Levitical law of the first fruits, and so maybe that's the possibility of why. So I guess to me, I lean more towards what we were talking about earlier. As if I'm going to speculate, that's the way I'm going to lean with my speculation right now.
But but when we look at the fact of the matter of what we read, all we read is the fact of, it went dark. There's an earthquake. Well, sorry, it went dark. The veil was torn.
Right.
There was an earthquake. The tombs got split open.
Right.
And then after Jesus resurrected, other people raised again from the dead
and
too.
went and
Which,
to the city.
you know, when I look at this, and the only thing that I can see, I know you got some notes, so I'm gonna try not to read them because I don't want to read their notes in it. The only thing I can witness is the fact of, hey, Jesus saying, hey, do you see what I did for them? I'm gonna do for you guys later too.
Right.
Because the fact of Jesus conquered sin and death. Because when Jesus died on the cross for our sin, this is where the big argument of what's more important. I think we talked about this before. What's more important, the death of Jesus or the resurrection? Well, the death was the sacrifice that literally paid the penalty, the atonement, that we could have a relationship with God again.
Right.
But what did the resurrection do? That proved that he defeated death, and then he backed up his claims by all these other people around him being like, yo, yeah, we was dead too, boss.
It was like the choir singing behind the pastor.
Exactly. And I think that's what it comes down to. And so when we look at what that actually means for us, it's the simple fact of Jesus' death did something.
Right.
Jesus' resurrection did something.
Yep.
We and with baptism, like, you know, we're buried in the likeness of his death and raised to walk in newness in him.
Right.
And the fact of it connects us with Jesus' death and resurrection, because it's the reminder of, in the same way that Jesus rose again from the dead, so ought you will be raised from the dead as well.
Right.
And now I think these guys that were raised from the dead, why does no scribe talk about? Why does nobody talk about? Well, nobody talked about the other ones that were raised from the dead. You don't see Lazarus showing up in other people's stuff.
Yeah.
You don't see Lazarus showing up in other tax records or in Josephus or anything like that.
Right. Well, Josephus, there was so little written about Jesus Christ. It was like a paragraph.
Because
about
again,
Jesus.
I think we take
But we
our
believe that Christ
we take
is
our
real.
vision of, yo, Jesus was like the biggest, best thing. Jesus was a nobody.
Compared to the grand scope of back
Like
then.
back then, he was a nobody.
Basically, Josephus
died a
says,
criminal.
yeah, there was this guy named Jesus, and he claimed to be the Christ,
But he's
and
from
he
Nazareth.
he was from Nazareth, and he was crucified, and he had followers who there was a big thing, scuttlebutt about his followers.
Scuttlebutt.
So there's that literally, if
Gossip,
you all
the
of
buzz,
Josephus is a book. His books are like, I don't know, 8 inches thick. It seems like, I don't know if it's actually 8 inches, but it's thick.
But
it's thick works of Josephus, and Christ gets a paragraph out of that. That book.
And I do want to say, this is not Bart Ehrman's greatest argument against the gospel's validity and the truth behind the gospels. I mean, the man has even said, like, Justin Briley, if anybody got contacts with him, I'd love to get him on the show. Always have, always will. But where was I going? But Bart Ehrman did say, like, even if every single gospel was proven that it wasn't a lie, he still wouldn't believe, because he can't deal with certain things. But
this goes back to Proverbs 24.
Like, for him,
doesn't it?
it's like extra little, like it's extra little salt. It's like, oh, and by the way, there's these dead folks. Like, where are these people at too?
It goes back to, it says 24, but it's Proverbs 26, 4-5, where it talks about, don't answer a fool to his folly lest you become foolish.
Yeah.
Answer a fool to his folly so that he may be wise, or made wise. That whole thing right there. That's Bart Ehrman is the fool. And if you answer the fool, it's foolishness, right? Don't answer him in his foolishness lest you be made foolish with him. So it's one of those people, like, it comes down to the heart. Do you really want to know, or are you just looking to argue? Right.
And going back to the story of Matthew, this was not even the main crux of the passage.
Right. This was like the blip, beep, and moved on.
But how wild would that be?
But it showed
how wild would that be to see people raised again from the dead? Which, and this might even have something to do with the fact of, let's bring this into the conversation too. Bring in Acts, Peter's sermon. He said, and the Jesus whom you had crucified is the Messiah. That's what he said. And at that day, 3,000, 2,000, 4,000, 3,000.
Thousands.
3,000
Just say
souls.
thousands, bro.
But thousands of souls were added to the church that day because of his day of Pentecost sermon. Maybe the only reason why that many souls were added to the church that day was because of these people who were risen again from the dead, who could testify of it too.
Right.
Because why would so many people all of a sudden, I don't know, a couple months later, a little bit later, a month later, all of a sudden be like, yeah, no, sign us up, unless they actually were able to say, no, I was dead, but look at me.
Right.
I saw him, he was dead, but now look at him. Like, holy cow, like, what's going on? So I feel like that this has to have a bigger play in the book of Acts that we don't even realize.
Sure.
That's where I'm going to land my plane.
All right. Well, I'm going to finish up with what is the importance of all of this, right? And this, I'm going to read this little excerpt from the Gospel Coalition, Greg Lanier, and this is what he has to say on it, right? So this is the importance in his opinion. Having attempted to clarify the historical details of this scene, I offer 3 perspectives on its interpretation. A, theology proper. The main actor of the scene is God himself. The verb in the passage, was torn, shook, were split, were opened, were raised, are all passive and imply God as the acting agent. His power breaks through even when all seems to be lost, just as he will be the one who raises Jesus from the dead in the next chapter. B, eschatology. The darkening of the sky and the rock-splitting earthquake evoke the cosmic upheaval accompanying the day of the Lord. Likewise, the end times raising of the dead is anticipated in many Old Testament texts. Indeed, Ezekiel prophesies that revived bodies will visit the Holy Land in Ezekiel 37:12. But this apocalyptic coloring doesn't make Matthew's scene unhistorical. Rather, it deliberately invokes Old Testament ideas to convey the significance of what is taking place. The eschatological day has been inaugurated. The judgment of God has been brought forward in time, expressed at the cross, and the hope of future resurrection has appeared in part. And then Christology, our third point. The insertion of this peculiar scene between Jesus' death and resurrection shows the power of both. His death breaks open our tombs, bringing us forth from death's curse, and in new life makes possible our new life. Indeed, the foreshadowing of the resurrection in this scene immediately after Christ breathes his last breath connects victory to the seeming defeat. These rays sense enter earthly Jerusalem where the temple veil had been torn in Matthew 27:51. The way into God's presence was open, but Matthew's peculiar scene is only a foretaste. The full meal will come in heavenly Jerusalem when God's true temple will be open and unveiled, Revelation 11:19, and the resurrected saints will dwell with the triune God forever. So, and then finally, what Christianity.com has to say, in the same way, our new life is a mirror of the work of Christ. His finished eternal work expressed through death and resurrection is the basis of our ability to walk in the newness of life through forgiveness and the empowerment of the Holy Spirit. Our stories, while lived in mortal flesh, should speak of a greater reality, a spiritual life and power that has already overcome death. We do this locally with people we know and as part of the church. We can live in victory and in hope, not based on the circumstances of temporary situations, but because of his work. The work of Christ transcends all. It is a gift allowing us to give hope to others, showing through our lives that death isn't the end. It is not final. There's a way to be reconciled to God, escape death, and be part of the story that shakes the foundations of all creations. We have found it and invite others along for the great adventure.
This is the... Oh, was it Stephen Chris Chapman?
This is the great... Oh, wait. What is it now? I know where you're going with this.
This is the great adventure. Isn't it the saddle up your horses?
Yeah.
That one?
We got a tail to... we got a trail to break. Whoa. Yeah, I think that's one. Yeah. This is the great adventure.
I was trying to tee you up with Stephen Chris Chapman.
That's what it was. Yeah, and I screwed up. Anyways, that's all I've got, my friend. That was my final thoughts. Push forward.
So were they zombies, or were they real people, or were they heavenly beings floating around Jerusalem? And I would say they were real people.
They were Lazarus type people. Yep, I would agree with that.
Time for Fun Facts with Filler.
Now, someone did suggest that we should do spooky facts with Fuller for this one, but you already spooked us out at the beginning of this dang episode, bro. So, what wonderful fun fact do you got to end this week's show on, my dude?
So here's the oh man, we forgot to hit the record button on that. I'm just kidding. There's your scary fun
we didn't
fact.
record this whole episode? Man, you suck.
But the fun fact of the day is, did you know tiramisu translates to take me to heaven in Italian?
Really?
Yeah, this implies that this dish is so good that it'll take you to heaven. This Italian dessert is well loved all over the world and has had several alternative twists that you yourself can create.
That's interesting. Now, I mean, they don't say take me to heaven anymore. They call it something else, and I don't know if I want to say that on the podcast.
Yeah,
this cake is better than... So I don't think we want to have that conversation.
Let's just, dude, you're ruining the
vibe.
You ruined the conclusion of Jesus takes us to heaven. We have a heavenly place to look forward to. So I added the tiramisu translates to take me to heaven. And then you have to go and ruin
that
idea
it came from, though.
But then you had to go ruin it.
No, Americans ruin it. Just like Americans apparently ruin all the things.
But you didn't have to bring it up.
That's true. That's true. But you know what I do have to bring up?
What's that?
That people can hang out with us and continue this conversation over in the Facebook group. So make sure you head over there. Check us out. We're also on Instagram and also just on Facebook in general. To be honest, we don't post there too much. Once in a while, I might throw some random reels up in there here and now and then just because I can, because AI technology is gloriously
makes
amazing.
it easier.
Makes it really, really easy. But if you want to continue the conversation, hang out with us, make sure you check us out on the Facebook group.
And if you haven't already, go over to our YouTube page where you can watch us as we record, and make sure you hit that subscribe button and that bell notification.
I wasn't ready. Try again.
The one job you had.
Do it again. It's not working. There it is.
There it is. So right now we have over 1,000 subscribers to YouTube.
Which is awesome.
I mean, that's just awesome. So you could be the 1,000 and whatever. And let's keep marching forward and proclaiming the gospel to everybody through the podcast.
And if you have a question you want us to answer on the show, feel free to text us at 574-400-5352 or email us at realtalkchristianpodcast@gmail.com. Oh, thank you for that, Fuller. I love you, man. And we love you guys. So until next time.
You guys go ahead and take it easy.